for conferences like this, very often we invite experts from these countries. Some of you living abroad, looking and trying to help us to understand this. We do not invite, I do not recall very many meetings where we would see clergy, religious leaders coming. And what Mohamed was sort of pointing out, but also Ahmed, you mentioned that how religion, religious leaders, radicalization and misusing religious feelings are stepping into these processes. Hassan, should we invite for next Sofia Platform some religious leaders who would explain us what's going on since they are so influential? Is Islam part of solution or part of problem? Well, look, broader things, and then gentlemen can zoom in probably in their own situations.
My short answer is no, because I think the diagnosis here is often creates the problem rather than the diagnosis seeks a solution to the problem. But that, I mean, indeed, I mean, I would describe the three differences that you made between the societies in Central and Eastern Europe and in the Middle East. The differences are all due to the same core roots, which is a weak civil society or a non-existent civil society. In the case of the Central and Eastern European, it was a repressed civil society that was nonetheless, despite of repression, was able to assert itself almost instantly and move ahead and balance the weak structures of the state that are reforming. The military, therefore, had no role in it, and religion had not to be used in order to compensate for the lack of civil society. Mm-hmm. There's also another dimension, which is political culture, no question, that has to do with the fact that the success of the nation state in Europe, the success of the singular model very often, has led to the emergence of a social contract that transcends constitution. Bulgarians felt Bulgarians. They did not fragment into very many. In the case of Yugoslavia, it did not work, and we saw the result. But I mean, the bottom line, my problem with, I mean, as problematic as the role of religion in politics is, very often when we say, okay, so we have this problem, let us seek religious leaders in order to enlighten us, we're empowering them at a time where they're not entitled to that empowerment because they're not proposing a political program. What they are, actually, I think Anas said it yesterday, and he was absolutely right, and that applies not just to the Islamists, but to most of the political spectrum across the region. What they are very adept at launching slogans, but no content. The one experimentation on the part of the Islamists across the whole Arab world, the one experimentation with content as opposed to slogans, is not the Muslim Brotherhood. Actually, it is in Tunisia. It is Nahda, which is far from complete and far from perfect, but nonetheless, we have the attempt at saying, going beyond Islam is the solution, let us try to deconstruct that and articulate what it means. And they will concede to you that we do not exactly know what it means. While elsewhere, really, Islamism is a hollow ideology. And this is where, while agreeing with Mohamed about the devastating effect of the Islamist manipulation of power, etc. But I would put it more in terms of populism and in terms of the reconstructed authoritarianism rather than something specific or particular to Islam. Islamism is the last grand narrative. We went through a liberalism that failed, a nationalism that failed, a socialism that failed, and now we are going through an Islamism that is failing. Okay, so indeed, we are being left with a vacuum, and this vacuum we do not have an alternative to it. But the short answer that yes, these societies lack the civil society institutions, and therefore I think the way to move in a direction that is, I wouldn't say, because there's no linearity here, I wouldn't want this direction to be similar to what Central and Eastern Europe had gone through, but comparable to, is to strengthen civil society and to develop political culture beyond the slogans, working on content, in particular critical thinking. What the whole region lacks, I think Mohamed mentioned it in terms of education, and also I think, I mean, it was mentioned many times so far. We have a lack of critical thinking. Does not mean that the people are less intelligent, but the tools available to them in order to deconstruct populism and authoritarianism are less. So these are the aspects, rather than inviting clerics who are going to give us platitudes.
And then I will open it to, please. You can react on this and then we'll.
فيما يخص سؤالك حول القادة الدينيين، أعتقد أن هناك شقين للجوابين. الأول هو أن القادة الدينيين
They can't hear you. What microphone? Okay.
هو أن القادة الدينيين بشكل خاص غير في أوروبا المسيحية، أنا أعتقد عندما جرى طرح مسودة الدستور الأوروبي قبل عدة سنوات، تم إرسال نسخة من هذه المسودة إلى البابا بنديكوس لقراءتها وإبداء بعض الملاحظات عليها. عاد هذه المسودة مع رسالة جوابية إلى رومان برودي الذي كان في وقتها رئيس المفوضية الأوروبية، وإلى فاليري جيسكار ديستاني الذي كان كونفنت الدستور الأوروبي. قال فيها: لقد قرأت بإمعان المسودة، ولكنني لم أجد أي كلمة تشير إلى دور الكنيسة والدين المسيحي في الدولة. فأجابه الاثنان بما يلي: لو كانت القضية شخصية لكنا نريد نحن أيضا نرغب في تسجيل هذا الموضوع، ولكن نحن أوروبا تخطت هذه المسألة ودفعت ثمنا باهظا من أجل أن تفصل الكنيسة عن الدولة. هذا الثمن الباهظ كلف أوروبا 100 عام من الحروب و70 مليون ضحية، وبالتالي ليس في واردنا أن نعطي للكنيسة أي دور سياسي في الدولة. بالنسبة أنك مجتمعات عربية وإسلامية، نحن نرى بين الحين والآخر وبشكل خاص في بعض البلدان العربية هناك ظهور متميز لبعض رجال الدين الذين بدأوا يتحدثون أنفسهم بأنه لا جدوى من إقحام الدين في السياسة وتسييس الدين. أنا يعني ممكن أن نذكر كثير من الأسماء الموجودة في العراق حتى على المستوى الشيعي وعلى المستوى السني، ولكن أصوات هؤلاء مكبوتة وليست لهم أي دور. ومن هنا أعتقد بأن ربما يمكن ويكون من المفيد في مثل هذه المؤتمرات دعوة هؤلاء رجال الدين الذين يريدون إبعاد الدين عن السياسة ولديهم نظريات وأفكار محددة في هذا الموضوع. شكرا.
Great. Okay, so now I'm in between 10 minutes, which I was given to extend it, and multitude of. So we'll start 1, 2, 3, and we will see where it leads us. But please introduce yourself and put questions because we don't have time to extend it too much. Please.
Justyna Porazińska, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland. I wanted to say one thing, but I will say two things because of your conclusions. Because as I come from Poland, where everything started in the 80s, and it couldn't have started without the Catholic Church and the election of the Pope John Paul II. As you all said, and as you all agreed, so there was no civil society in our Central European countries. So the Catholic Church created something like a platform where all the opposition members, believers and non-believers, joined their efforts. So I think that we cannot neglect the role of the religion in the societies. Maybe not now. Now the situation of the Polish Church is completely different. But in that time, and I think that we can compare the situation in the region to that time in Poland and the European Central European countries. So this one thing. And the second, that no one of you mentioned the education. I can say that in our countries, we finally succeeded, but we passed through all the same stages. So the first was enthusiasm, the second was elections and the different results of the elections, and finally disappointed, but we succeeded because all the players agreed as well to change some fundamental things, some fundamental elements for the state. And one of this was education. So critical thinking comes from the school. And the future state building comes from the school. So if I know a little bit the curriculum from the Syrian, because I was posted in Syria for many years, so I followed it. And it was shaped by the regime. And I'm sure that in other countries, as it was in Poland and in our countries, if we don't start with the change, the reform of the education, we will not succeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Over there and here. Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm Latifa Akharbash, Moroccan ambassador to Bulgaria. أود أن أدعوكم إلى تمرين بسيط هنا. هو أن نتساءل جميعا ونتخيل كيف يمكن أن تكون إجابة أحد مواطني دول ما يسمى بالربيع العربي.
And we don't have translation.
I can go now? Thank you. أود أن أدعوكم إلى تمرين يبدو لي مهم. هو أن نتساءل جميعا ونتخيل ما قد تكون إجابة أحد.
We still don't have translation.
It's a pity for me because it's an inclusive exercise. I am asking you. Okay, it's okay now. Благодаря. أود مرة أخرى أن أدعوكم إلى تمرين يبدو لي مهم، وهو أن نتساءل جميعا هنا ونتخيل كيف قد تكون إجابة أحد مواطني دولة من دول ما يسمى بالربيع العربي حول سؤال واحد، وهو ما هو تقييمه لتفاعل الغرب والدول الأوروبية وأمريكا مع ظاهرة الربيع العربي. سوف ربما تكون إجابته كالتالي. أولا، هو سوف يلاحظ أن لا أحد من كل هذه الدول استشعر حدود الربيع العربي، ولكن في نفس الوقت الكل يعطي فتاوي حول الربيع العربي ويعطي تقييم. ملاحظة ثانية لهذا المواطن هو أن هناك بعض من هرول إلى مساندة الحاكمين الجدد لأنهم ولو أنهم متأسلمين ودعاة إسلام سياسي سوف يمكن أن يكونون حد لظاهرة الجهادية ولمن هو أكثر تأسلم منهم فسوندوا. في نفس الوقت سوف يلاحظ أن البعض مباشرة بعد حدوث هذا الربيع العربي أصبح وجلا وخائفا، وسوف يغير كلمة الربيع العربي إلى كلمة أخرى وهي الفصل العربي Arab Season. في نفس الوقت ملاحظة ثالثة، سوف يلاحظ أيضا بأن بعض الدول الأوروبية ليلة حصول الثورة كانت تقترح وسائل للحد من هذه المظاهرات وتأجيل الثورة. إذن هذا الربيع العربي هو شيء إيجابي كنقطة تحول، وهو شيء إيجابي لأن هذا التحول نحن جميعا شمالا وجنوبا مدعوون إليه. هو فرصة طيبة حتى تغير كل هذه الدول نظرتها إلى هذا العالم العربي. وأول شيء يجب أن يتغير، وقد قيل هذا الصباح، هو أن العالم العربي هو ليس كيس كبير نضع فيه الكل. نحن لا نتكلم في عالمنا العربي عن العالم الأوروبي، نحن نتكلم عن دول أوروبية، عن بناء أوروبي، عن اتحاد أوروبي. نحن إذن العرب ننادي بأن لا نوضع كلنا في كيس واحد. أتمم تدخلي بثلاث ملاحظات وجيزة. أولا، ما هو جديد في هذا نقطة التحول وهو إيجابي جدا، وهناك فكرة جديدة سوف يبنى لها، فكرة المواطنة. لما قال الشعب المصري العظيم في الشوارع المصرية لا لحكم المرشد، هذه جملة مهمة جدا، لأن المواطن العربي يريد أن يحكم بالديمقراطية ليس بفكر الجماعة. إذن الإسلام السياسي هو خبر سيء للديمقراطية، لكن في نفس الوقت أن يحكم علينا بأن نحدث في مجتمعاتنا علمانية على الشكل الأوروبي هو اضطهاد. يجب أن نثق بالمجتمع العربي. سؤال ثاني
Madam Ambassador, I'm sorry, but
30 seconds. If
you can't have lecture now if you
Okay.
because we just don't have time. You pose your question or close.
My question is,
please.
هل في هذا العالم العربي مجال لأن يوثق فيه حتى نعتبر بأن مشكل الديمقراطية في العالم العربي ومشكل الديمقراطية في العالم ككل، مثلا الفاعلين الجدد في الديمقراطية والمجتمع المدني كيف يمكنه أن يكون وسيطا ديمقراطيا؟ آخر سؤال، وهو أن كان هناك طرح سؤال مهم حول دور التربية، وفي نظري إذا أردنا أن يصبح هذا الربيع ربيعا فعلا يجب أن نستثمر في التربية. ما سبب مشاكل العالم العربي هو أنه كانت هناك low cost education. إذن لا يمكننا أن نقفل الحدود الأوروبية ونقول أننا نساعد العالم العربي، لأن التربية هو أيضا ideas mobility. شكرا جزيلا.
Thanks. Questions, no lectures, please. Questions.
Is it working?
The question is, nobody's mentioning the fact that a pluralistic society...
Hello? Hello, my name is Vasil Stefanov from Sofia News Agency. Question to Mr.
But
Popov.
I didn't. I asked. Sofia News Agency don't have floor. The floor is here, so please.
So Şahin Alpay from Turkey. Now, a pluralistic society, a strong civil society requires that you have a strong pluralistic economy, a market economy. I think a lot of the problems of the Arab world have to do exactly with the state-dominated economies, with the oil curse and everything. I'm surprised that none of you mentioned the economic dimension of the problems. I think there lies the problem of underdeveloped civil society, underdeveloped critical thinking, and dogmatic Islam. It's Islam. If Islam is going to modernize, it requires that society becomes pluralistic, and then Islam will become... I'm, of course, talking out of experience in my country, in Turkey. Now, the second question, especially to Ahmed and perhaps to Hassan also, is I think Hassan was the one who mentioned that there is a special experiment in Tunisia with the Al-Nahda. It is not the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt which we should look at. As far as I could follow, I placed a lot of hopes on Al-Nahda, especially Rashid Ghannouchi, to produce some sort of liberal, democratic, Islamic politics. Is he failing in this respect? What is the matter? As far as I can tell from his lectures, his talks, I listened to him personally also, he appears to me as a very, very liberal but devout Muslim. What is the matter with Ghannouchi?
Okay, now organizers, so should we, because I know we will still continue conference, we have two panels, but unfortunately we will try to wrap up this panel, and I feel sorry that we'll have to close it. So we'll start from Julian. Would you like to say anything in conclusion, since the questions was not directly, but if...
I mean, there were many
please.
very legitimate questions. I will pick just very briefly two of them. One is about the active civil society. Active civil society doesn't mean democracy. I mean, let's not mix these two things. Active civil society could also mean complete devastation of democracy. And the other thing about economy is very important issue, but when we compare the two transitions between, very broadly, the Arab world and the former communist state, I mean, we have to bear in mind that the Arab world is much, much, much more advanced than we were 25 years ago, when the whole economy was completely state and centralized, and people were not allowed to travel out. So in that sense, countries like Egypt and Tunisia and Libya and Syria, they start from a much more pluralistic and open economic model, and we can, with the hindsight, can be jealous of that position, starting position from economic point of view. That doesn't mean that economy is not important. It's very important.
Thank you. Hassan?
I do not accept the notion of economic determinism. I think, for that matter, in terms of the oil curse, Egypt would have loved to have an oil curse. But, I mean, if you think about it, my focus was on the state, on the exaggerated, unchecked role of the state that ended up not just homogenizing society, but also homogenizing the economy. Keep in mind that Egypt, in the course of the 19th century, was slated to become one of the most advanced nations with regard to industry, with regard to development at all levels. In 1960, Egypt had the same GDP as Korea and the same population. So look, between 1960 and today, where South Korea is, where Egypt is, so it's not the economy that is leading the change or lack of, as much as the oppressive state that has really homogenized and therefore drove Egypt down to where it is. So I would say, meaning, with regard to Al-Nahda, with regard to Rashid Al-Nushi, to move to the second question, the experimentation continues, but there is the realization, I think, on his part and the people who are genuinely engaged in such an experimentation, that the raw material that they're working with, meaning the society that they're working with, is not in tune with their project. So their project today consists of two very challenging tasks. Task number one is to develop what amounts to substance to this Islamic program, Mashru' they call it, okay, the project, to develop substance which they would concede, and actually if you look at it, you have to admit that is incomplete, lacking, weak. But task number two, which is even more dramatic and more challenging, is to make that Mashru' relevant to the audience that is still very much so driven by slogans.
Thanks. Ahmed?
Yeah. Thank you. I will speak in Arabic just to practice it.
Tunisian accent.
لا بالعربية حتى يفهم الجميع. المسألة الأولى حول الدين. لابد في مجتمعاتنا من ثورة دينية. بدون ثورة دينية كما حصلت في المجتمع الغربي لا يمكن الفصل بين الدين والدولة، لأن الدين بالنسبة للدين الإسلامي بالتحديد ليس شأنا فرديا فحسب، فهو كذلك شأنا سياسيا، أي أن إدارة المجتمع ممكن أن تتم في عقلية رجل الدين عن طريق الدين، وبالتالي فهي مسألة سياسية بالتحديد. وحتى نفهم يعني الإسلام فلا بد أن ننظر له من هذه صعوبة الفصل بين الدين